Hi everybody, my name is Ryan LaFave. I'm the founder of LogSmarter, a full-stack software developer and a senior computer science student at the University of New Hampshire. If you don't know about LogSmarter, we make nutrition tracking software and we use machine learning to help people reach and sustain their body composition goals. Our application uses a freemium model where we give our customers a limited time free trial. Then we require an auto-renewing monthly subscription once the trial is over to continue using our software. In this video, I'm going to share 4 things that I wished I had known before I started implementing cross-platform renewable subscriptions in our application and the lessons I learned from encountering those problems. For some context, our software was developed using Angular and Google Firebase. The web version of LogSmarter is live and you can check it out at logsmarter.net. The most common question we get is when is our mobile app going to be released? And we don't have a release date for the app yet, but it's our top priority going forward. Right now, we're developing the app and it's almost ready. We're using Cordova to convert our web application into a mobile application, and we plan to release on iOS first, then Android. Our end goal is to have a cross-platform application that lets our users access their data on any device anywhere. As far as the payment processors that we currently have in our tech stack, we're using Stripe to process payments made on web, and we're going to use in-app purchase for iOS payments and in-app billing for Android payments. This is the biggest roadblock that we've hit in development, and it's that cross-platform subscriptions can be a bit of a nightmare. In general, renewable subscriptions can be hard to wrap your head around if you haven't dealt with a third-party payment processor's API before. So now I'm going to get into the 4 things that I wish somebody had told me before I started integrating our application with these third-party payment processors. The first thing that I wish I had known is that this is probably not going to be a quick task if you haven't done this before. Before I had written a single line of code for implementing renewable subscriptions in LogSmarter, I had the idea in my head that this was just going to be a week or 2 of implementation and then we were going to be good to go. I was basing this off of the fact that so many different things are $5 to $15 a month now. So I was thinking, how hard could implementing subscriptions in LogSmarter really be? And unfortunately, I was just wrong, at least for our situation. It took me about 2 months to get our application fully integrated with Stripe. And this was partly because I was working 40 hours a week for my internship when I was developing this. So the only times I could work on it were at night or the weekends. And one of the biggest things that held me up in development was trying to design a UI and UX that looked and felt good for accepting credit card information and just handling payments in general. I was following some tutorials online, but I just didn't come up with anything that I really liked. And a big part of that is because handling credit card information is tricky. So what I ended up doing is what a lot of people do, and I integrated with another third-party service which creates a checkout page for Stripe. This page is hooked up to your Stripe account, and all of these services will follow a similar pattern. You tell their API what product from your Stripe store you want to create the checkout page for, and then you send them some metadata that you want to associate with the checkout session, like a user ID, along with a return URL, and then that checkout page is going to navigate to that return URL when the user associated with that user ID is done with their payment. Their API will then return a URL that you can navigate to for the checkout session. And if the user purchases a subscription, then a webhook will be sent to a URL that you can configure, and you can respond to subscription state change events from that webhook. Unless you have some very specific checkout flow that isn't possible to be satisfied by using one of these third-party checkout pages, I would really recommend just skipping trying to create your own checkout page and instead finding one of these third-party services that meets your needs. Especially if you're a small team, it eliminates a lot of development time and the hassle of having to maintain the checkout form as regulations change. The pricing for these services is pretty reasonable, and there's a bunch of different ones out there, so I'm sure that most people can find one that fits their needs. This leads me perfectly into the second thing that I wish I had known, which is that Stripe is not going to handle sales tax for you. This broke my brain when I first found it out. I was pretty shocked, and it was one of those things that I hadn't thought about until it was too late. Unfortunately, most of the guides online that teach you how to create your own checkout page or get set up with one of the third-party checkout pages don't actually mention this as an issue that you're going to have to deal with, so it's not something that I had considered. I was not willing to risk any potential legal issues related to taxes, so I ended up having to get educated on sales tax and specifically software sales tax. This is actually a really tricky topic because the industry is moving a lot faster than legislation in a lot of areas, and there's still a lot of unknowns. You're absolutely going to want to use a third-party service to help you with this, especially if you don't have any experience dealing with software sales tax, which I'm assuming most people don't. And there's a couple different services that Stripe is actually partnered with you can check out on their website. After doing a lot of research, consulting with my advisors, my team, and a real accountant, I finally felt confident enough to proceed and landed on using a third-party service called Octobat that integrates with Stripe to create a checkout page, and that checkout page will calculate sales tax at checkout time based on the customer's location. It's actually the checkout page that I showed you in the last section. This was honestly the most stressful part of the whole process for LogSmarter's development for me, and I'd honestly chosen a separate service to use for our checkout page, but Octobat had by far the cleanest way of handling sales tax that I could find of all the different services I was looking at, so I ended up switching the checkout page that we used to use Octobat's. They also generate some really nice reports to help you with filing your taxes, so that was another plus of moving over to Octobat. Overall, the whole learning experience of integrating with Stripe was worthwhile for me, but definitely not an easy or quick implementation for one developer and having no prior experience dealing with third-party payment processors or renewable subscriptions. Once our Stripe implementation was good to go, we did some final rounds of testing as a team and we released LogSmarter on web. Things were going really good, but we kept on getting asked about when we would have our mobile app ready. We always planned to have a mobile app, and we just hadn't landed on which technologies we're going to use to convert our web application into a mobile application. Once we decided on Cordova, one of the first things that we realized is that there were some additional complexities that we hadn't considered in how we were going to have to process payments, and that leads me into the third thing that I wish I had known, and that's that Apple does not play well with Stripe. I probably should have known this, but Apple wants you to use their proprietary payment processor called in-app purchase if you're going to sell software through the App Store. So if you don't, your app is going to get rejected from the App Store, and that meant that we really didn't have a choice. From a developer's perspective, this is really annoying since we already have a working subscription system implemented with Stripe, but since we definitely want to be on the App Store, we're going to have to play by Apple's rules. So far, this has been nowhere near as bad as getting set up with Stripe was the first time, and luckily, in-app purchase handles sales tax for you, so we're not gonna have to deal with any of the issues related to that. But it does require some development time because you're going to have to make sure your subscription system is compatible with multiple payment processors. And that segues me into the very last thing that I wish I had known, which is your profit margins are not gonna be the same across the different platforms. This is one of those things that was unknown to my team and I before we started working on our in-app purchase integration, and it stems from the fact that we didn't know we needed multiple payment processors and that each one of them has a different pricing scheme. So depending on what your implementation is across the various platforms, you're gonna have a mix of fixed and scaling fees. This graphic is an example of our fees, and there are other fees associated with development on the various platforms, but I've only listed fees here that are a direct result of processing payments made for renewable subscriptions. As you can see, you're probably going to have much better profit margins on the web than in your mobile apps. Apple's gotten a lot of flack for taking 30% of profits from developers, but they haven't budged on that position until very recently. Apple actually just announced that starting January 1st of 2021, they're only going to be taking 15% for businesses earning less than 1 million in the App Store. And you really do want to be on the App Store because even though your profit margins might be less, for a lot of companies, you're going to end up making more money on the App Store because people are more willing to download apps and you'll have more people in your application, leading to more conversions. In the past, Apple's had some pretty notable disputes with companies like Spotify and Fortnite, which led them to beef up their App Store review guidelines to prevent pretty much any way of getting around that 15 to 30% cut. Google is now following in their footsteps, and Google's policy isn't enforced yet, but developers have until 2021 to integrate with in-app billing, which as of right now also takes a 30% cut of whatever you make. Once you've kind of accepted that you can't get around these pretty egregious fees from Apple and Google, you have a couple different strategies you can take with your pricing. You can calculate what you need to price subscriptions at on the different platforms to keep your profit margin per subscription the same, or you can keep the price the same across all platforms. That's all I have to say about how we handle cross-platform renewable subscriptions and the lessons that I learned along the way. If you've made it this far, I'd like to say a big thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I also want to give a special thank you to Professor Bardos, who has been my advisor now for 2 independent studies during my time as a computer science student at the University of New Hampshire. The first independent study was focused on developing and validating our machine learning model and algorithm, And the second independent study now is focused on converting our existing web application into a mobile application. Professor Bardos has been extremely supportive of LogSmarter. He's been an awesome advisor and just in general, an amazing resource for some of the complex technical problems we've faced while building our company. If you want to learn more about LogSmarter, you can go to our website, logsmarter.net. And I'm looking forward to making more videos like this where I can share some of the lessons I've learned as we continue to grow our company.